Hello, and welcome everyone to our Vistatec Life Sciences in Focus podcast. Fascinating conversations with global life sciences experts. I'm your host, María Mateos, and today we are discussing software development for life sciences. And for that, we have a marvelous guest, Brandon VanArman, software engineer contractor for Medtronic. Welcome, Brandon. We are delighted to have you today.
Hello, thank you, Maria. It's great to be on.
Thank you. We are delighted to have you today. Brandon has been working as a software engineer in the medical industry for over 10 years and has specialized in localization for about 5 of those. He has worked in most of the area of the software cycle, but with expertise in validation, verification, and testing, as well as continuity operations. Brandon's work involves developing and testing products under FDA guidelines. He enjoys learning about different languages and cultures, as he believes that can make the world a more friendly place. I couldn't agree more, Brandon. And as a personal note, he has 2 lovable cats named Hermes and Dolce. They are designer cats who demand all of his attention when he's not working. His hobbies include martial arts and voice acting. He claims to have no professional experience there. Let me doubt about that. And well, that's enough from me. Welcome again, Brandon. Please tell the audience a little about yourself, your background, and maybe your current work. How about that?
So I actually started my software journey back in April 2012, still fresh. I actually remember when I started as a software tester for medical devices. And at the same day, I actually took my driver's license exam. So I passed my driver's license exam and I got accepted to be a medical device tester at the same time. My first starting date was April 2012. I started out just verifying medical devices for infusion and pain management. From there, I stuck around. I got hired on full time. And then I started doing software engineering and I explored all kinds of different areas. I found the wonderful area of localization. I had no idea this was even something that could be done in software. One of the original reasons I went into software was, oh, hey, I like languages and software is kind of like another language. Much to my dismay, my implementation skills kind of fell off to the wayside, but I did have more expertise in verification, validation. Now I'm into like document stuff. And all this really started at my first company. So, but when I was there, I did join localization engineering. It wasn't actually even a team. It was basically my lead, who was also passionate about localization, and myself. And the team I was on was a bit of, we called ourselves the Island of Misfit Toys at the beginning, because we had like infrastructure, build engineering, localization, release and change management, like all the stuff that the company needed, but the teams themselves didn't have the bandwidth to handle. So that was fun. I was at that company for 6-7 years. Then I moved on into infection prevention technology, where I did some assistance with localization. And then I come into Medtronic, which has its own localization portion of their company. So I mostly just advise on the software part, but there's an entire team that handles all of the reviews, translations, and everything else that I used to love, but no longer do.
That's very, very interesting. And it's great to see that you have over a decade of experience in software development for life sciences industry. That's very impressive. And I was wondering, I know your main experience is in life sciences, but what challenges do you find in this industry compared maybe with others?
Okay, so The main difference and the only real difference I can give you as far as software engineering, other than just academic going to school or personal practice, is just when I worked as a customer service representative for a salvage car auction. So if you've ever wondered, at least in the United States, when your car gets stolen or totaled or anything, hope it never happens to you. But if it does, there are business models that make sure that it gets back in the wild. I used to be one of those people. So as far as it goes for any unique challenges for software localization or considerations for it, I can only hear about it secondhand. I haven't had firsthand non-medical experience. So you can say I was born and raised in medical, trial by fire, if you will. Some big things that I hear, right, is it's really the regulated industries. Everything has to be done. Everything has to be documented. You're following processes. You work usually based off of risk assessments and what the best possible and safest possible outcome is for the patient while providing solutions for your customers, which will treat the patients while also adhering to the guidelines in the regulated bodies that allow those people to help our clients. So it's a long chain, and the moment you forget what you're doing and lose sight, it can seem very daunting. But anytime you see them released and out in the wild, it's a swift reminder of what we do. So.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Well, I'm born and raised in life sciences as well. So that's why I ask about other industries, if you had any idea about that. And I guess working under strict deadlines, using FDA guidelines for development and testing must be challenging as well. I'm curious to know how software development fits into this regulated world.
Isn't that just a topic for the day? Probably pull out some popcorn, a nice soda, maybe just water or tea if that's your fancy. Nah, just kidding. I'll keep it brief. So as far as it goes, when I went to school, I tell everybody this. I didn't actually go for software engineering. I actually have a degree in information technology. All of my engineering experience has been personally discovered and professionally discovered. So I like to joke around that everybody on the team is smarter than I am. I'm just the one that'll test it. But from what I learned in school about the software development lifecycle, there's multiple phases. We start at requirements, and then it'll go down to architecture and design, and then it goes down into testing and implementation, then actual verification, then validation and release, and then we have maintenance or post-market. So as far as it goes, the regulated industry more or less follows that to a T. The thing I've experienced, though, is each company I've been at has a slightly different way of approaching it while staying in those guidelines. So even though the guidelines are there, it's actually still quite flexible in how you do it.
Though I kept thinking about a phrase you said earlier during the interview, that you said softwares are a language itself, which really caught my attention. We know that you are passionate about languages and language learning, and you all know I do too. So I cannot help but ask, how does the integration of translation and localization processes fit into the overall development life cycle of medical devices?
Why do
That's
I
an
laugh?
interesting one.
Yes, why do I laugh? Because I'm sure everybody here who's listening and everybody here who has their own experience, they know the answer, and it's the best software engineer answer in existence, and that is, it depends.
Oh, we love the depends in the language industry.
We love it, right? See, that's why engineers and localization experts alike, life sciences, we all get along. So as far as it goes, each place I've worked at actually has a different way of handling their translations. The most experience that I had was basically it was just this island of misfit toys, which was my team lead and me mostly. We had a couple other people help with some of the developments of tools, which I'm sure I can't talk about too much in depth, but we had a few ways of getting through. We had some stuff where we tracked our own. It was almost like our own translation memory, except it was just specialized for our group. So when we were considering when we wanted to make another version of a product or make another product that was like an existing product, or if a new product manager came in or a new translator that we qualified came in or a reviewer, we could always go back in history easily and say, well, what were we calling cassettes for the last 20 years? And then we come back and we can say, like, oh, well, unless there's a regulatory concern or a legal concern, or there's a case where this is sensitive, there's really no reason to change it. So probably as far as being in software, that was the most involved one that I was used to. We handled all of the software stuff, and then we would work with a translation agency. Obviously, they have agreements, our own TMs, own cost translation services. They were all wonderful. They were all wonderful. And mostly the software group itself just focused on the development of the new features, and people who had the specialty would advise good integration points. And one that we took, which should be no surprise to anybody who's been doing this for a while, we took the 85-10-5 approach. So, right, we wait until 85% of the product is developed, and then we wait until for the next 10%, and then we get the supposed last 5%. Anything else, it's right, it has to be risk-based, it has to be safety related, any other changes you got in there. And again, this is software, this isn't marketing. So marketing has a completely different way of doing theirs, although we did feed ours directly into our technical communications. So service manuals and IFUs, or instructions for use, could be aligned. That was one of the last things I was working on at that first company, was getting our TMs aligned, and we could start making sure that we're notified when one triggers a change to see if it had to change our software, or if our software changed, where in the manuals we have to do it, or if it triggered another screenshot update. That's the most involved I was. Second
I would
company.
say, sorry to interrupt, I would say very much involved. And speaking of TMs and changes, we know that has a lot to do with cultures. When we learn a language, we actually learn a culture itself. So I guess my next question has to do a little bit with that. So have you encountered any specific cultural considerations that significantly impact the translation and localization, specifically in a medical device software? Does culture has to do with that?
So yes, there are. When I hear things like significant, my mind immediately goes to risk, and I think, is there a catastrophic event that could happen? I
Yes.
highly doubt that that's really what this is getting at, but it could lead to it. I mean, there are considerations, and again, you understand, I understand, anybody who's been working in this wonderful space knows that space, limited real estate, some languages just take more space to convey a similar idea. Of course, everybody will always pick on German. Have you translated anything into Hungarian? They're just as colorful. Swedish, Norwegian, Turkish. That was a surprise for me. Basically, any agglutinative language, any language that just glues words together, that's a big consideration as far as length or width of something like titles or controls, explanations, instructions. As far as it goes, again, with real estate, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thai, all of these that have really tall characters or are just taller than normal. Definitely, so depending on how your software was made, you get one of two things that happen. One, it cuts off the character, so you just don't get to see it. And some languages like Thai, they have their little tonal marks and their vowel marks right there. So if that's cut out, they won't know how to read it. They might be able to infer, but hey, we know in medical, you don't want them to infer what it means. You want them to know without a shadow of a doubt what it means. No ambiguity, none. And then others like, say, Chinese and Japanese, which use kanji and hanji respectively. If you did it another way, the DPI focus will actually shrink it and it'll simplify the characters, which after a while, if you're sitting there and you're staring at the screen, you're like, wait, what does this mean? So that was another one. That's only as far as just those considerations. The other areas I've seen, not necessarily software itself. Well, I mean, also then, of course, then there's any language with right to left. If you're not prepared for that on embedded, applications, not a problem. Websites, usually not a problem. Embedded, you have to specifically make sure that it can handle it, as well as fonts. I've actually done a font assessment to make sure that it worked on the device that I was working on in that first company. So I got to get useful with, or get aware of and made privy to the specialty that people have to go through when they do font analysis. Now that goes into human factors. Unfortunately, despite my cries for help with the multilingual simulship or simultaneous shipment, for those who aren't aware of that one yet, doing a US and OUS outside US, or just in country and outside of country release. The point of this was, if we're doing a font assessment, we should make sure that all the fonts work. Whereas in this one, it was primarily for English. And I feel that all of us just kind of have a little spot in our hearts that goes, no, that's not right. Because we know that our customers will always look at it and say, this was made for English. And then we were the afterthought.
Yeah, now that you talk about that, that's very interesting on how source files are created. And I'm sure you see the difference, but I'm curious to know which difference you find and realize about when a source file was created only for English use, rather than when it's created thinking ahead of localization.
So was the question, how do I feel about it, or what do I think about it?
So my question was, I guess, what differences do you find in sources when they were created specifically thinking about localization in the future, rather than when those sources were created to be used only in English, and then out of the blue, you find out that you need to localize because you want to target different markets?
Okay, so we're gonna peel the onion a bit here. So there's a rainbow, an onion, if we keep the same analogy, of different ways that this can happen. There's the flat out, oh, this will never go anywhere, it's English only. So right, literally it's developed as if the US will be the only country, or international English speakers will be the only geographies that will look at it. So if it's developed in the US, you're going to get US-based language and terminology. If it's in the UK, it's going to be only the UK. One impact of which, of course, I'm sure you're aware of, is the difference between urgent and ASAP between the US and the UK. First time I found that out, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So let them know it's urgent, not ASAP. In any case, at that point, right, it's a lot of replanning. It's literally going all the way back to your requirements and having to say, what should our software do? And going back into the architecture. Sometimes, in worst cases, you need to literally change components on a board because it just simply can't handle it. One such example I ran into, again, not naming any products or companies, but when I was working on one, there was a processor that could handle extended Latin alphabet, and that was its extent. So when we were first releasing to mostly European markets, and some English-speaking Asian markets. It was good. Then we realized that we had a big market in Japan. And what did we do? Did we find font files that work for it and we could merge it? No. We decided let's have it specially customized for us. And then that's a separate one. By the way, it can only do katakana. So
Okay.
any Japanese speakers out there and people who have worked with it, I'm sorry. I tried when I touched it and I saw it, I said, is there any way we could at least get hiragana in here? And I was told no, because that was out of scope of the changes. So there's another layer, which actually was pretty funny because the IFU was in complete, right? Kanji, it had katakana and hiragana. It had everything in the IFU. When it had to align with the screenshots, it had to go back to katakana, and then it had to be supported with what the kanji is and the hiragana to make sure that it's understood. And then the companion software application and the web application that could be used, that was also fully kanjiized, as they called it. So really, it was just the device itself that needed that special restriction. Um, then there's special considerations. When you get down a little further, you're like, oh, we want to go to these markets and we know we'll need this feature that none of the other languages have. We ended up still releasing to, I want to say it was Israel, I believe. However, because of the time constraints of the projects and the difficulty and what it would take to re-architect, allowing right to left, and in the future, supporting any ligatures that are needed. Because if you're like, hey, we're in Israel, if I remember right, Hebrew doesn't really use ligatures, they're still separate characters. But when we get into like Farsi or Arabic, those have ligatures. So we would need a way to do that. And they decided, you know what, switching between left and right isn't working right now. Regulations over there say it needs to at least be in English, doesn't need to be in the native language. We're doing that. So there's push through, make a solution. There's too tough, leave it out. And then there's just, we didn't consider it at all. The final consideration, of course, is right at the very beginning. You're like, we know these are our markets. We want to, at the minimum, to have these. And in addition, we want to make sure that our architecture supports these new things, such as right to left, ligatures, fonts. That's right, fonts. It needs to render it. So yeah, those are my experiences working through those. I've been through all of them, and let me tell you, they're all interesting, they're all fun, but by far the happiest customers I've seen are the ones where they're considered at the beginning, not at the end.
Well, that's very, very nice piece of advice from you. We from the LSP side very much appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Brandon. We have come to an end here, so thank you so much for being our guest today. Before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
I mean, there's a lot of things, but keeping in consideration everybody's busy, everybody's got kids, pets, their own life. I won't take too much of it. There's a couple of books. They're non-localization specific, but things that I found that help me as a person. And one of those books is The One Thing. I cannot remember the author right now, but it's a very, very good book. The whole idea of the one thing is a lot of people and localization people, you'll know this right offhand, same with medical, conflicting priorities, all kinds of priorities. There's things always trying to grab at your attention, dividing where it should go, where your focus is. The one thing focuses on having you go through your own assessments and asking, what is the one thing that I can do such that if I do it, it renders a majority of these other tasks unneeded or not as important? So I'm sure we have all had to try to explain, just like anybody in IT, why is this needed? How much does it cost? How much will we make doing this? So having to go through this, after a while, you start to hear these questions and you can anticipate them. It's the one thing. What do they want to know? Do I have to go through a presentation and the whole, kit and caboodle, jumping through the hoops? Or the one thing, what do they really want to know? What is this really getting at? Simplify it. Another book that I recommend is called The Compound Effect. I believe that's by Darren Hardy. And the whole idea of the compound effect is that habits can work either way. You can have good habits and bad habits, though when you do something consistently, its effects multiply. And I found this very effective, even like outside of localization, even aside from my personal life, just working and doing, making medical devices in general. It's so many times we're diverted off. Well, let's do this way. Well, let's do this way. Well, let's do this way. And hey, we know there's no one size fits all. Though the idea is if we can have a consistent way of doing something and the spirit of that consistency is there, we gain momentum. And with that momentum, we gain energy, and it makes us easier to go through things rather than, for instance, we're releasing a product and now we have to do all the documents at the end. We're releasing a product and now we're going to do a few documents here and save some for later. And then the next product we do, we're going to do all the documentation up front and then just update it as we go. That confuses people. Again, it points you back to the one thing. The compound effect will keep you moving forward. Last thing I want to touch on is just anybody, and I'm sure it's already done here, I highly, highly advise somebody just reach outside of your own culture, reach outside of your own language. It help even if you can't travel, which sadly I have not yet outside of the United States, only been to Hawaii outside of non-continental, non-contiguous United States. But it helps you understand, even if you understand how their sentences are constructed, you'll understand this is why they use these words. This is why they pause. This is why they act the way they act. This is why it's important. So touching back on, Maria, what you had said at the beginning, this is what I believe. If we can learn even just one other, it just opens us up to be more accepting and friendly and able to work with each other once we understand we all have the same goals. We may be speaking a different language, but when it comes down to it, we're all speaking the same language. So.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Brandon, for your insight today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I trust our audience will enjoy this as much as I have done. And to our audience, this Life Sciences in Focus podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and other leading platforms, as well as in YouTube, if you prefer to watch it. Please make sure to tune in again next month for Vistatec Life Sciences in Focus, fascinating conversations with global life sciences experts. Thank you.